The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am greatly honoured to rise here to speak on behalf of the people of Timmins James Bay. And one of my Liberal colleagues earlier on said how we had to continue to show deference on this issue to the Finance Minister to reassure Canadians they should have trust in this House. The question that we're discussing today is a fundamental question about a breach of trust with Canadians. And when I talk with Canadians across this country, quite frankly, they do not believe that Ottawa is interested in or will protect their basic interests. And we need to look no further than the present Finance Minister. And we look at it at the situation today with the Sears workers who have been laid off thanks to the hedge fund mismanagement of what was once a stellar company. We see people whose basic pension benefits are at risk. And the most we see from the Liberals is, well, that's really too bad, but it's before the courts. It's the same thing we heard when Nortel went down, and the Abitibi workers, and the people across my riding who had their pensions stolen by corporate executives like Peggy Whitty. And you know, that kind of theft is not only legal in Canada, you get bonuses for doing it. And you will never see that government stand up and defend people whose pensions are being stolen from them, because they are fundamentally the party of the 1%. And I'm not saying that in an exaggerated fashion, because we have only to look at our present Finance Minister, who's the privatized pension king of this country. And so the issue today, hot off the presses, after major national attention, he's finally written the Ethics Commissioner about the fact that his shares that he receives from Morneau Chappelle gives him $150,000 of pocket change a month and has given him an extra $40 million since he's come into government. Now, the Liberals would tell us that that kind of money is virtuous, because a man who makes that much money, who offers himself for public service, is someone we should admire, and he can only be doing it for the benefit of all of us little people. And I'd like to believe that, but if you look at this issue in terms of where Morneau Chappelle has been and where this present Finance Minister has been, the issue of a blind trust doesn't cut it. I will refer to you to a speech he gave in 2013 that was entitled that elderly poverty is not a problem. I mean, I guess you have to own a villa in the south of France to think that elderly poverty isn't a problem in Canada. And in that speech, he made a number of statements about the push to get rid of defined pension benefit plans. He said that a significant number of our clients have parent companies or sister companies in the UK, and that the movement away from defined pension benefits has been easier there than it is in Canada. And he says we need legislation enabling targeted benefit plans and shared risk plans for all Canadian jurisdictions. He told his shareholders we need to move on legislation. And he said, in that same speech, as defined pension benefit consultants and administrators, we've been in the front row. So what is one of the first pieces of legislation this minister brings forward in his own name? Is legislation that will particularly benefit Morneau Chappelle. Bill C-27, the attack on defined pension benefits in this country, that he said was necessary in order to give his company the advantage. When the discussions on changes of defined pension benefits began with the previous government, Morneau and Chappelle wanted their investors to know that the idea came from them. The proposed TBP framework that the government outlined in their consultation paper is clearly modeled after the shared risk pension plans that were introduced in 2012 in New Brunswick, and Morneau Chappelle's experts were heavily involved in the design of that. So this is what they do for a living. This is why he makes $150,000 a month, and his benefits have gone up $40 million. If you introduce legislation that will benefit his company, obviously their shares are going to go up. So how is this a problem for ethics. Well, of course, when you're a Liberal, you don't think that there's a problem with ethics because he's a nice guy. We've been told that we've been picking on him because he forgot to announce that he had this private French villa through a private corporation. And the Liberals over there have been saying that even to raise that issue, any one of us could have made that same mistake. Perhaps. Now, I think it's not a fair question to ask in this House because the amount of money that people earn here is much higher than the folks back home. But can we have a show of hands? How many people here own a villa in the south of France? I don't see any, and the minister's gone on the Prime Minister's hide, so he's not here. Man, I don't even know if he would have put up his hand.
I just want to remind the member. Order. I just want to remind the member for Timmins James Bay that he's not allowed to indicate who's in and who's not in the House. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Speaker, you're right. I meant to say that the finance minister probably wouldn't put up his hand because he might have forgotten that he owned the House. Now this was the question, though. The Liberals, again, were saying I was mean to them because they said, you know, that's really unfair, Charlie, because, you know, he actually did announce before.
Again, I just want to remind the member he may not want to refer by members, whether it's himself or not, by first or last name.
Well, I'd like to thank the Speaker. I don't have a private corporation I could refer to myself as. I'm just, you know, Joe Average. But they told me, you know, it was different. He forgot to mention it was a private corporation. And there was silly me thinking, yeah, all the people I know own houses with their family, not through private offshore corporations. But this man does. And so now, October 17th, he's saying he's willing to look at the issue of a blind trust for the money that he's making from Morneau Chappelle. I don't think that cuts it. Because you were looking at a man who said in 2013 that legislation was needed to be able to attack defined pension benefits that many workers and many seniors across this country depend on. And then he came into this House and he was given the position as finance minister. And the first major piece of legislation he brought in was Bill C-27, which was the direct form of legislation that his company required to undermine pension benefits for Canadian workers. And all through that time, he was able to participate in directing his company because it wasn't in a blind trust. And even if it wasn't a blind trust, how would anyone think that a man whose name is the company, Morneau Chappelle, who makes their money getting rid of defined pension benefits and brags about it, brings in the legislation? I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, but putting it in a blind trust on October 17 and asking for advice from the Ethics Commissioner doesn't cut it. This is about a fundamental, shocking breach, and I've seen a lot of breaches in Parliament over the years, and I've seen a lot of dubious and bogus behaviour. But to have the Liberal government come in and tell us that this is somehow high-minded integrity and just a little bit of absent-mindedness doesn't cut it. Because when I talk to Canadians across this country, they talk to me about their disappearing pensions. I want to talk about Lisa Oakhill, 100-year-old, first woman to run a Sears store who's losing her pension benefits right now. Sure. And you will never see anybody from Morneau Chappelle or anybody on that government stand up to fight for that senior citizen. So it falls to us as parliamentarians to say that this kind of misuse of public office to look after the pals and friends of the Liberal Party is not acceptable. We have to hold this House to a higher standard because Canadians have absolutely no reason to believe in a Prime Minister who does his $1,500 cash for access meetings with Chinese billionaires, and when he gets caught out and says, why was he doing it? Oh, they were worried about the middle class. They were meeting about the middle class. Now, I guess us little people are supposed to be, wow, isn't that amazing? These Chinese billionaires paid $1,500 to get to the ear of the Prime Minister to talk about the middle class. Yeah, I bet. How about probably not? And how about saying that if we're going to have a finance minister bringing legislation that has to do with pensions, that Bill C-27 will have to be withdrawn because it is so obviously tarnished with the self-interest of him and his company and his offshore villas that it has no credibility. And for anybody on the government side now to stand up with that finance minister and say that they are going to continue to push this attack on defined pension benefits when this man laid out the plan for his shareholders in 2013 and has followed it through, it falls to this government to say they will reject him and his bill.
Before I go to questions and comments, I just want to remind the parliamentary